Sorry.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Krams are here. Another week, another band. This week we are covering the 6 studio albums of Soundgarden, one of the big 4 of grunge out of Seattle in the late 80s. It really hit it big in the early to mid 90s. Only 5 albums in the initial run, and then they came back after a while and did one more. So just 6, not that big of a discography, but pretty solid. Interested to see your ranking. I've heard every album at least once before. I think probably the newest one I only heard maybe 1 or 2 times when it first came out. Everything else I knew pretty well. How about you guys?
Yeah, actually for me, I don't think I had ever heard the first one before, and definitely never got around to King Animal, the comeback in, what was it, 2012, 2013, 2012, I think. So yeah, those two to bookend their albums. I actually always thought Louder Than Love was the first one for some reason. That was just a indexing error on my part. Bad braining by me, but no big deal. It never got me in any trouble in regular society, so I'm cool. But I've always liked Soundgarden, so this was enjoyable for sure.
Yeah, I'm familiar with all the albums, plus some of the lesser known like Fop and Screaming Life, the split EP or the EP they did and combined them or whatever. And they didn't have too much like B-sides or like found songs and demos and stuff. So it's interesting that they had so few albums, especially in their initial run, and yet were so kind of like legendary among the grunge bands. They were the first of the Seattle grunge bands that were signed, I believe. So they kind of like were the first to gain momentum. And then, of course, Alice in Chains and Nirvana and everybody kind of followed. But I always liked Soundgarden a lot. Super Unknown came in second, I think, in 94 for me. Bad Motorfinger, like 6th in 91. I probably should have it above Use Your Illusion 2, which I put in front of it. Probably a mistake, but I like them. I just wish they had done a little bit more. They kind of faded out right at the peak. And I don't know, I guess infighting killed them, but I feel like they could have done a lot more than they did. So I was always a little disappointed how they went out. But what are you going to do? They made some classic records along the way.
All right, who's going to start?
I guess I can kick it off. Yeah, this whole thing was pretty enjoyable. Case in point, my number 6 is still going to be a 3-star album, a good album. I've got King Animal, the comeback. I think it's pretty darn good, just rock record. A little bit less Cornell quality, but it's still, he's going from far beyond the average singer to just beyond the average singer. So still great vocals on this one. One note I do have on this is, although I like the drumming, at times it's a little too busy for some of these songs and kind of distracts, I feel like. But overall, it's I'm not going to say it's puny or wimpy, but it's definitely not, 88 to 94 Soundgarden with the heaviness and that sludgy, really thick borderline metal grunge kind of sound. It's a little more melodic. They're always really interesting, like song construction, even on this album, like really unique chord progressions. Nothing really goes the way traditional, structure goes. So I think it's a good rock album. I think the strength of the album is right in the middle with 1,000 Days Before, Blood on the Valley Floor, Bones of Birds. I do think it's too long, which I think it is probably said about every single Soundgarden album, is just runs a little bit too long, especially in some albums when they have that really droned out, slow, hardcore kind of pace. But still like it. 3 stars, my number 6.
My number 6 is also King Animal. It's perfectly fine. It's an okay listen, but it's, not that interesting, not that memorable. I think Kim Thayil was doing a lot of really cool stuff with his guitar tones on Down on the Upside, the last one before the split, and all of that kind of interesting guitar work, I think, is pretty much gone, at least as far as the guitar tone goes. He kind of has his tone on this record, and that kind of is what it is. It's way more meat and potatoes. I don't think the songwriting is nearly as interesting. It's fine. Like Graham said, it's not a bad record at all. Chris Cornell's voice, though, I think is way worse than it was before. It's better than it is on some of the Audio Slave stuff, though. I think a little bit better here, but it's still not touching the classic period. So that's a little bit of a disappointment, but that had kind of been that way for a while at this point. 3 stars for me also.
Well, I'm gonna buck the trend a little bit. I got Ultra Mega OK, which I do love the title, Ultra Mega OK. I think that's hilarious. Always been one of my favorite album titles. It's the debut, and it's sort of the band just like really sludgy, a little rawer and punkier than they would turn into with like Louder Than Love. So I do like that aspect of it. I like the speed that they get, the tempo on this. But there's just not that many catchy, interesting songs. A lot of wailing, a lot of raw riffs. I do like the Sabbath sort of aping Beyond the Wheel. And I think Flower is a good sort of kind of glimpse at what they'll turn into. Same with Smokestack Lightning. Like you can see the hints of the future Soundgarden on here. It's an interesting album. I just don't think it's like that good. Like I appreciate it, but I don't really want to listen to it really. So it's 3 stars and it's good, but it's just not like classic Soundgarden in my mind.
Yes, agreed. It's my number 5, Ultra Mega OK. Yeah, I don't think it really has their best stuff, obviously, but it is kind of cool to get that early, really raw grunge vibe. It's, like Joe said, it has some really speedier, faster moments, pretty bombastic. It seems like they're just a heavy attitude band that, isn't really even approaching songwriting in the form they will later or in a traditional form. It's really wild and unpredictable. It's got even like these really moments of really cool, just random breakdowns and just guitar parts and stuff like that. I like Flower a lot. I think Mood for Trouble is awesome. Circle of Power, 1 Minute of Silence, maybe the best cover ever of the John and Yoko song. But it's this one also, it's kind of cool because it has some personality. Like there's a little bit of humor in it, a little bit. Like they get pretty serious after this. Like they're just a lot of attitude, and their certain thematics and their writing get kind of heavy with the heavy music. But this one is probably the most playful album. But yeah, I think it's good. 3 stars. It just doesn't have their best stuff on it.
This is the point in the video where everyone gets mad at me because my number 5 is Super Unknown. The singles are all really good. I like all this hit. The radio hits are all great. Beyond that, I don't know. It's just missing some of the excitement of their first 3 records. I read a little bit about how a lot of people think this is them kind of expanding their musical scope, but to me, it feels like it's shrinking. It's getting way more basic. The punk element, the hardcore elements are all taken out. It's not really even that much metal anymore. It's just kind of a lot of mid-tempo stuff. Practically every song on this record is the same tempo. It's really long. It's 15 tracks, 70 minutes. I think all of the last 5 tracks could easily be cut and no one would miss them. I don't know. I just think it's really disappointing after how great the predecessor was. So still 3.5 stars on the strength of the singles, but that's about it for me. None of the deep cuts really do it for me.
Let's resuscitate Joe. Get him back to life here.
Okay, well, that was, I don't know, unexpected, because I expect the unexpected with Jason. It's the incorrect opinion, clearly, but whatever. I don't care. My number 5 is going to be King Animal. It is, like you guys said, a little basic. It's just sort of like their sound condensed down into like old person rock and roll a little bit. Like it's just, it doesn't have the excitement. It doesn't have like the Kim Thayil getting crazy and experimental on this. Like the psychedelic element that was really kind of peeking through in their early work is gone. And it's just missing like those essential riffs. Like nothing on here is that catchy or that memorable. No like pump your fist choruses. It's not like an embarrassing comeback or anything. It's just, I think it's a little too anonymous, but I agree with Cramser, the middle there with Bones of Birds. Blood on the Valley Floor is real cool. For some reason, they let off like with the single "Been Away Too Long," which is probably the worst song on the whole album. So it always kind of like, I heard that, I was like, oh, Soundgarden's coming back, sweet. And then I heard the single, I was like, yeah, it's kind of lame. But the rest of it's probably better than that. And it's a good album, but it's not a great album or particularly memorable or really lives up to the Soundgarden name. So 3.5 stars. It's just not essential Soundgarden. Simple as that.
My number 4, and I'm going to take a shot in the dark that this might be Jason's runner-up because I think he's going bad Moto Finger. But let's talk about me for a second. I've got Down on the Upside at number 4. Probably the one that is the most different to me than everything else in their catalog. I think this one they're really trying to flex their creative muscle here. It's brighter, much less metal, sounds thinner, kind of prettier and perkier. To me, they're kind of trying to do the STP tries to do Zeppelin thing. Like that's where I kind of see a lot of this coming from, especially in a song like Zero Chance. I think it's a good album, 3 stars. Overall, it's probably a bit too smiley for me. And again, just too darn long. And like all their other albums, they put their weakest songs in a bunch at the end. So it's just like, why didn't you just not have these, make it 12 minutes shorter? But I think Pretty Noose is awesome. I like Blow Up the Outside World, Burden in My Hand, Never Named. I do not like Ty Cobb for some reason. 3 stars. Pretty good rock record.
All right, my number 4 is Ultra Mega OK, their debut. They did have a couple EPs before this, as you guys said. Those were on Sub Pop. For this one, they moved to SST Records, and they got hooked up with a producer who I guess was just giving the label a good deal. So they were encouraged to go with this guy, Drew Canulette, I think is how you say his name. And they weren't happy with him. They said he didn't really understand the band or what was going on in Seattle, and they didn't like the production at all. I think it's okay. The new like deluxe editions that are remastered sound pretty good, I think. And I dug back and I found the original versions too and checked those out. The guitars are a little more buried in the mix and not quite as upfront. But other than that, I think it's still a pretty decent rock record. A lot more of the metal influence that you hear a lot of the early Sabbath on these earlier records of theirs, which is cool. Flower's a good opener. All Your Lies has 2 really great guitar solos on it. The first one's like this really blistering fast one, and then the second one's a little slower and bluesier. Beyond the Wheel, I think, is like the first glimpse you get of that really great high pitch Chris Cornell wailing, which is awesome. They show off their punk and hardcore influences, some on Circle of Power, which their original bass player sings, Hiro Yamamoto. I think their cover of Smokestack Lightning is really cool too. I like a lot of this record. I think it's pretty good, pretty interesting, and I would go 3.5 on this one. Oh, and in regards to the name of the record, I read that they called it that because they thought the material was ultra mega, but the production was just okay.
Thank you for that, Jason. Louder Than Love is my number 4. It's another good album. It's full of the Black Sabbath-ness, I think maybe more so than any other album. It's very raw still. The production's still kind of murky, but I think they branch out a little more sonically, something like Hands All Over with its big environmental message. It's, this kind of big enveloping song with some nice, ringing guitars, just really kind of big sounding. And it's not quite as, just dedicated to the riffs. It's really sort of expanding their sonic palette a little bit. But they still do like the really bruising stuff, Ugly Truth, Gun. There's some weird stuff like on Full On Kevin's Mom, like that sort of humor, weirdness that pops in from every now and again. Loud Love's great, big kind of psychedelic. You get those cool, very cool sounding Kim Thayil guitar tones that I love. I think just in general though, it's a little too monotone with its heaviness. They're a little bit of the shades and like the interesting textures that they'll do on Bad Motorfinger and of course Super Unknown. But it's just like straight jackhammer riffs. And Cornell just doesn't quite have like that up and down yet. It's very, maybe a little too monotone sometimes, a little too just like all wailing. And he just doesn't have that control that he would get really on the next album, I think. So I like it. There's a lot of, some cool songs on here, but I think it's still like 3.5 stars.
All right. Top 3 albums are all going to be 4 stars. So these are kind of interchangeable. My number 3 is going to be Louder Than Love. Going into this, I thought it would be number 1. I don't think it's really that far off from my number 1 and number 2. Yeah, I love like the early Sabbath sort of influence, the brutal, just stoner rock with such cool guitar tones. I read one review where they were saying that the Kim Thayil's guitar technique was like The Edge, but metaled out and with attitude, which I think is pretty cool. I think that's a good description for it. I do disagree with you on Cornell. I think this is the best he sounds in the Soundgarden catalog because he's just cut the F loose. He's just screaming. He treats it like it's a metal album or a Greta Van Fleet record and just never stops. He just loses his mind a lot. And this one, has a little bit of the ultra mega sort of personality on it too, which I really like you said, with like Kevin's mom on it and stuff like that. So I really think it's cool. It just doesn't have quite like the songwriting technique that they'll get down and polish off better in the other 2 albums that I still have to talk about. But I think it's great. I mean, it's just really bombastic and heavy, and of the big 4 grunge, I think they're easily the closest to just like straight metal. I mean, Alice in Chains maybe too, but especially just like that really cool sludgy slow core metal. There's some fast stuffs on here too, but yeah, and it's got a couple of my favorite Soundgarden tracks, which I'll talk about tomorrow, but it's close. I wanted to get it higher, but it just doesn't have quite as many of my favorite Soundgarden tracks. So I've got to have it at number 3, Louder Than Love, but 4 stars.
My number 3 and 2, I went back and forth on, really tight between them, and Cram was very close to correct in his prediction, but it's not my runner-up. It's my number 3. I have Down on the Upside. Really similar to Super Unknown, but to me, it just has so much more variety on it and more like interesting moments that kind of pull your ears in different directions. A lot of really cool guitar tones. I think Kim Thayil is fantastic on this record. I think he's kind of the star here. His playing's not as flashy as on the early records, but he's just doing more subtle things, layering guitars and stuff on this record that it really works well. The songwriting on this record really is like a precursor to Euphoria Morning, I think. You can sort of hear that style of songwriting coming in with a lot of the chord choices and note choices and the types of melodies that he's starting to write, which I really like. I love Euphoria Morning. I think it's a great record. So I like the songwriting here, but I do think this record is a little too long still. It's not quite as long as Super Unknown, but I think it's maybe a few minutes shorter. You could probably stand to lose maybe 3 tracks or so from this, tighten it up a little, but I think overall it is really good and a better version of Super Unknown.
I don't think I've ever disagreed with one of Jason's reviews more than that one. I'm a little stunned that you would say some of those things. Down on the Upside is my number 3, so I'll talk about Jason's review as well in my review of this.
Let's not forget that in Depeche Mode, his last was your 1, so nothing could ever be more disagreeable than that. And that was like a 14-album catalog.
True. Same with Kate Bush and the Dreaming. Let's not forget about her and that. That one was even worse. But I don't know. For me, this one doesn't sound anything like Euphoria Morning. I don't think Kim Thayil's at all the star. He only has 1 track on here that he wrote himself. So he's sort of like was shrinking a little bit. Matt Cameron wrote Rhinosaur. Ben Shepherd wrote like 6 tracks on here. So there's a lot going on. The production, I think, is not very good. They self-produced it, and I think it's probably the weakest part of the whole shebang. It sounds thin, like that thickness of Super Unknown, totally gone. Even the songs that I really like, I love Burn in My Hand. I love the variation in the sonic palette there. I think really works. The piano intro, almost a cappella, just Cornell and the piano until the rest of the band kicks in. Phenomenal. And I love the opening track, Pretty News. But in between those, there's, I don't know, Rhinosaur, Zero Chance, Dusty, kind of throwaways for me. It's like they're almost really good songs, but they're just missing something. You have Ty Cobb with the cool mandolin intro, which is great. Blood Up the Outside World's real similar to Super Unknown. And then in the back half, I agree with Jason, and I think Kramzer also said it, just too long, too much stuff that sort of sounds similar. A couple more Shepherd tracks that I just don't love, an Unkind and Switch Opens. And, I like Never the Machine Forever, the Kim Thayil one, and I like No Attention and Overfloater. But, you could probably trim like 4 tracks off this. And I just don't think it has the hooks that Super Unknown has. I was listening to My Wave right before this, and just the layers of interesting things that Thayil's doing on that track, I think is better than anything on this album. So, yes, I disagree with Jason. I think this is Thayil's weakest performance maybe since Ultra Mega OK. He's still good, but he is sort of like being shrunk in the band, and Shepherd and Cornell are really kind of taking the bulk of the songwriting and the sort of, structures on them. So I like it. It's 4 stars. 1996. I always forget that it made the list in 96 because 96 was a bad year in music, but I definitely see them like splintering apart here. And I just don't think they have like that unified, awesome sound that they did on Super Unknown. And it's a pretty big step down, in my opinion, from that one.
His role in the band might be shrinking. That could be true. But to me, it's almost like Alex Lifeson in the 80s. Like the synths are taking over. You got to find a way to like carve your little space out in the mix. And to me, he does it. He's got so many cool guitar tones on this record.
Well, maybe I'm not listening close enough to him, because I just don't think the songs themselves have nearly the same amount of hooks and interesting sort of like melodies that they did. So perhaps I'm discounting his guitar just because I don't like the songs quite as much.
You both make really good points, and I was on Team Joe in that little mini debate until he used My Wave as an example, which is one of my least favorite songs on Super Unknown. I think it's super lame. So, and let's talk more about Super Unknown as my number 2. I've got it at 4 stars. Really close. Really had to think long and hard in the shower this morning about this, or spoiler alert, Bad Motorfinger, going to be number 1. I think overall there's more standout tracks on Super Unknown, but it is just too darn long. And Jason does have a point that it is a little monotonous with its tempo at times. But overall, I do think it's pretty creative and ambitious for them. The best thing about it are the riffs. They're very memorable, really meaty and heavy. I'm not crazy about some of the little effects they do on Cornell's voice. Like even on Black Hole Sun, like I want the louder than love Chris Cornell when he can really screech and fill the room with his essence. This one, you're kind of got a big piece of gold and you're like wrapping it in tinfoil here. Like, what are you doing? Just let him do his thing. But those are really my only criticisms, other than it's just too darn long. Kickstand and 4th of July, I don't care for at all, and really weigh it down at the end. But I do kind of like the style on this album the most. They're going for more like spiritual kind of psychedelic stuff with the writing and the guitar tones. I love the little mellotron. It's a weird kind of sounding mellotron, like maybe a synthetic mellotron on Mailman. Really cool. Let Me Down is good. Black Hole Sun, obviously. Spoon Man. Yeah, it's a great record. I think just my number 1 is just a little bit better of a full album listen for me, but it's close. However, number 2, Super Unknown.
All right, my number 2 is the major label debut, Louder Than Love, from 1989 on A&M Records. The production is way better here. They got Terry Date producing, who had done some bands prior to this. He had done like a few Metal Church records and some other stuff. But after this, he would go on to all kinds of heavy bands, lots of new metal bands, Deftones, Stained, Incubus, Helmet, Pantera, all that kind of stuff. So he's a pretty big name producer. It sounds really good. Cram nailed it. I mean, the highlight is Cornell on this one. I think he's just in peak form on this. I think they're still doing like the early Sabbath aping on this the way they did on Ultra Mega OK, but I think they're getting a little more creative with it on this. Get on the Snake has such an awesome groove. Full on Kevin's Mom is that kind of fast punky number that they kind of do on almost every single record except Super Unknown for some reason. Thayil's leads on it are great. Big Dumb Sex, the guitar is really cool. There's like a doubled lead part on that sounds so much like the part itself, and the tone of it sounds a lot like the song She by Kiss. I like this record a lot. I think it's great. 4 stars for me on this one.
Yeah, it's definitely the best Cornell Soundgarden album. Although what's weird is, as much as I love Cornell, I still take Temple of the Dog and Euphoria Morning as his best vote. Like not Soundgarden. I think his best vocal performances are on those 2 albums rather than anything on Soundgarden. Not that they're bad on Soundgarden, but yeah, I'll take Temple of the Dog and Euphoria Morning as my peak Cornell, not Audioslave.
Well, I do agree with you there. I think Euphoria Morning is his best overall, and I think he sounds just perfect on Temple of the Dog. Maybe it's just because he's playing a little more sort of standard rock and roll on those, as opposed to like this miasma of grunge and metal and whatever the heck else they threw in there, punk and everything else. But my number 2 is going to be Bad Motorfinger, so we're not going to have the three-peat on this one. It's pretty close. I think this album rules right from the beginning with Rusty Cage, that really awesome guitar intro. It sounds like, I don't know, like the horns of an approaching army or something. Just super, super memorable. And right off the bat, the production just miles better. The sound, everything's a lot fuller. Everything's more focused. The guitar sounds, it really sounds like a major label. I know We're Louder Than Love was their major label debut, but this sounds like just like really polished, as polished as you can get on an album like this heavy and grungy. Outshined, I think, is really their first like super memorable, like made for radio, made to take over the alternative stations of America, with the really great lyrics, the Feeling California, or looking California, but feeling Minnesota, I think is a great line. And just the riffs on this are so like well done. Like every verse, every chorus is just super memorable. But they don't lose like their weirdness either. You have a song like Face Pollution, where in the bridge, like it sounds like the song's like being played backwards. Like there's these horns that just like pop in, like it almost sounds like a sample. And it's just like really weird. Cornell's just going absolutely nuts. I think this is his best sounding. I don't think it's Louder Than Love like you guys think. I think right on this album, he sounds the best. Jesus Christ Pose, he's just absolutely going off, just screaming at the top of his lungs. And I think that the music is just a little more interesting than the previous. I think that shows a lot of growth. Even the cuts in the back, the non-big radio songs like Room 1,000 Years Wide and Circle My Good Eye Closed, Mind Ride, Drawing Flies, they all have like this super catchiness to it that you don't really get in metal often. So even though there's like these bludgeoning riffs and heavy as heck rhythm section, it's just like almost catchy, the guitar parts. There's always something going on that really just like catches your ear, almost hooky on some of these things. So I think just all the way through is a complete album. There's no filler. There's no wasted minutes. I think it's good to the last drop, from Rusty Cage to New Damage. Probably their most consistent. It just doesn't quite have as many big radio ballads that Super Unknown has, which is obviously my number 1. But no shame in losing out to that one. It's 4.5. It might be 5 stars. I haven't totally decided. If it's 5 stars, I have to change up my 91 list. So that brings a whole new wrinkle into the equation. But it's a great album. It's loaded.
Yeah, it is my number 1, and Joe just knocked the wind out of me. You stole every one of my notes, I think. I got nothing left to talk about. Good review. Yeah, it's their most consistent, and I also think it has the most balance to it. Balance and just a nice variety of tempos and kind of styles. It can be quick, fast, and heavy at times, and like that metalish, thick, sludgy sound at times. Weirdly instrumental, like Joe was saying, especially that section in Face Pollution. Could be a King Crimson section. It's pretty cool. It's first half has like a lot of pure adrenaline, then it kind of smooths out and gets nice and weird and interesting and complex, like Mind Riot, and then it just kind of, has nice juxtaposition towards the end and gets a little bit tougher again. Lyrics are better on this one, full of like more thematic imagery, especially like Jesus Christ pose and stuff like that. Cornell sounds great on this as well. I just prefer Louder Than Love a little bit more, but the songs are much better here. The guitar is more interesting here. And then just compared to Super Unknown, it was so tough putting this ahead of it because it doesn't have the highs that Super Unknown does, but it also doesn't have the lows, and it's just leaner and tighter. Yeah, I think, and especially just some of the variety, they use everything in the canvas here. When, I think, like I said, on Super Unknown, it's a little bit one note throughout with its style, but yeah, it's great. 4 stars. Bad Motor Finger.
Yeah, Bad Motor Finger is my number 1 as well. You guys covered most of it. I don't think either of you said that this was the first record with Ben Shepherd, but that's worth pointing out because his bass tone's a little beefier and a little more aggressive. He sounds really good on it. Terry Date produced this one again, but I think the production sounds better here than it did on Louder Than Love. Everything it's kind of like that record, but everything's taken up a notch. The production's better, the songwriting's better, everything's a little more memorable. I think this is Chris Cornell's best singing. I said he's the star of the show on Louder Than Love, but he's even better on this one. No one ever talks about this track Slaves and Bulldozers, but I think that's the best he ever sounded. He just keeps getting louder and yelling, and it keeps going up and up, and like it's insane. It's one of the craziest rock vocal performances I've ever heard. I think it's awesome. The drumming's great on it. Matt Cameron's at the top of his game. Jesus Christ Pose is such an unorthodox song. That's such a weird riff, and it somehow works. It's so cool. Just a lot of really good stuff on here. I like all the songs. I think it's definitely their best for me. It's I got it at 4.5.
Do you guys like Matt Cameron's drumming more with Soundgarden or Pearl Jam?
Soundgarden.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that, but I do think Cameron brings a nice live element to Pearl Jam.
Yeah, I like him. There was some comments that in our Pearl Jam video that he wasn't like a good fit for Pearl Jam. I don't know that I would say that, but I do think he's better in Soundgarden.
And he's better than Jeremy Irons, the Oscar winner. You fool.
Yes. Well, I guess I'm ending things with the lone dissenting vote. I got Super Unknown. This is my number 1. I just think it's sort of like the clearest, most polished version of grunge there is. Everything, the production is even more radio friendly than Bad Motorfinger. They kind of went all in. They got a different producer. It's Michael Beinhorn produced this one, and everything's just like made to be on alternative radio, for better or worse. I mean, I guess it depends on just how much you like that raw Stooges, Black Sabbath, early stuff. But I can't deny the riffs, the catchiness, the melodies, the hooks on this one. There's like 5 or 6 big singles. You got The Day I Tried to Live and Fell on Black Days, which are super catchy, sort of like slower tempo, a little more laid back, a little more focused on Cornell. But they all have great guitar parts, great bass parts. Somehow Crams doesn't like My Wave, but My Wave rules. So much stuff going on with Thayil's guitar. There's like 4 tracks, 4 layers. Got some really cool psychedelic stuff going on. It's a really kind of cool tempo. It goes from, I think, 5/4 to 4/4. And that's something we didn't mention. Just they use a lot of different time signatures, a lot of different alternate tunings as well. They're always sort of messing around with that. I definitely think that kind of helps change the sound around, even though it's a lot of riffing. It always sounds interesting and different. and new. And you don't really notice those weird time signatures because they kind of just blend in, but you definitely kind of like feel it when you're listening to them. Obviously, you got Spoon Man, which I love, just sort of a straight ahead, almost like just alternative, big rocker, really catchy though. Of course, you got the really different sonic palette of Black Hole Sun with that really cool intro with just the guitar, real like single note stuff. Even on the verse, you have that like higher psychedelic sounding Kim Thayil line, and then a really super Vernon Reid like inspired guitar solo on that one, sort of like dissonant and like not what you really expect. It's not like a super beautiful sounding soaring guitar solo. It's really kind of raw and ugly, which I think is really cool for that song. I guess I get that. Yeah, the tempo's sort of the same on most of the tracks throughout. Kickstand's a little faster. A lot of plotting though, but I don't really mind the length. 70 minutes, it's long, but I think it holds pretty much throughout the whole thing. Some weird stuff like Half, like Ben Shepherd. It's interesting. There's a lot of different sonic sounds going on here. So I like it. I don't think it overstays its welcome or anything. I think they do enough different stuff to make it all sound good. And I love, everything Super Unknown, Lumo Wreck, Fresh Tendrils, 4th of July. And I think Like Suicide's a real kind of cool, emotional way to end it. Definitely different. Reminds me more of like Hands All Over than most of the real heavy riffage stuff that they do on this. So I think it's good all the way through. It's a 5-star album. It was my runner-up in '94, just losing to Blur. But I think this is pretty much the peak of grunge right here. So yeah, 5 stars. My number one, Super Unknown.
So how are we feeling about Soundgarden overall?
I like Soundgarden a lot. They're not my favorite of the grunge catalog, but obviously I like all the albums, and I think half of them are great albums. I'm just also a big grunge fan, so there are plenty of bands that I like a lot. I don't think they quite get into like my top 100. To me, the thing that kind of sets them apart from other acts in this genre or style is I don't think they're quite as creative or as good songwriters as Pearl Jam or Nirvana or some of the others. And that's really the only thing that, because they've got the tools. I love Kim Thayil, love Chris Cornell, Matt Cameron. I think the songwriting is the one thing that kind of holds them back, and also just a little bit of the variety of the songwriting. Like they do cool, unique twists inside their box, but they don't really go outside it too often. And that's the only drawback I have. But overall, I think they're really good, and would have loved to have seen them live back in the day.
I really like Soundgarden. And I think Bad Motorfinger and Super Unknown, definitely in my top 100 of all time. But as a whole, like group, they had such a limited output. And other than those two, I mean, I like Down on the Upside, but I would cut half of it and just kind of pick out the songs I really like. As a whole album experience, I think it's just pretty good. So I don't know where they would rank in like my top 100 if they would even make it, despite me loving the sound, loving Chris Cornell, loving Kim Thayil, loving Matt Cameron. They just had such a limited output. Kind of like what Kramser was saying, I don't think they fully explored everything they could have. I think they sort of, burned out before they really could put together like that really interesting, maybe like late period change like Pearl Jam was able to do so successfully, and change their sound and adapt and do all sorts of cool stuff. Soundgarden just sort of went away. They just burned out a little too soon for me to definitively say they're one of my top 100 favorite bands of all time.
So I like them a lot. I really enjoyed listening to the discography, but for some reason they're not a band that I like think about or go back to that often outside of something like this. So, I mean, Bad Motorfinger's awesome. It could probably be like a 5-star album, but I don't listen to it that often. It's not something that like I'm drawn back to for whatever reason. So, and maybe it's the things that you guys are talking about where it's just not that much variety, that I just don't find them that interesting, even though putting them on, completely enjoyable. Really enjoyed listening to the records. So
I think about Chris Cornell in incredibly high esteem, like a rock god, one of my all-time favorite singers, but like none of his actual like pursuits, Soundgarden, like Temple of the Dog, only one. The solo stuff is good. I don't mind Audio Slave, but you put all that together with him, it's more impressive than like the individual projects. I mean, he's one of the best ever, and yeah, for some reason, Soundgarden just doesn't quite get into that elite status for me.
all right, so let us know what you think of Soundgarden. Tell us what you think of our lists and tell us how you rate them. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and check the description for all of our social media and our website. And we will see you tomorrow with our top 10 favorite Soundgarden songs. Thanks for watching.